What we want to do right now is bring in Brian Sobel. He is a political analyst, and he talks about politics. He writes about politics all the time. And Brian, thanks for being with us here as we kind of preview these remarks. So what the White House has been saying, Brian, is that this is an address for the battle of the soul of the nation. I covered the 2019-2020 presidential primary races. Got to cover President, then candidate Biden a little bit, and that was a common refrain on the campaign trail. He wanted to restore and the battle for the soul of the nation. And we've heard it time and time again as he has been president. What does that mean? And so he's been in office now for 2 years. How has he done?
In terms, Andrew, of bringing the nation together, it is still a very divided nation. This speech tonight at Independence Hall may be designed, one, to solidify his base, the Democratic base, but also to try to pick off Republicans who have soured on the legacy of Donald Trump. They're still Republicans, but not in the corner of Donald Trump any longer. And so make no mistake about it, this speech is highly political, and we'll see what the reaction to it is.
Okay, Brian, we do have some excerpts the White House put out of the speech itself. We want to read those out to some of our viewers here. I'm going to put that up on the screen. One of them says, "So tonight I have come here to the place where it all began to speak plainly to the nation about the threats we face, about the power we have in our own hands to meet those threats, and about the incredible future that lies in front of us if we only choose it." We have a couple more that the White House put out as well. But this, is so interesting because it dovetails with Kevin McCarthy's decision to give that address, if you will, on Biden's own home turf in Scranton. Here's another one. It says, "MAGA forces are determined to take this country backwards to an America where there is no right to choose, no right to privacy, no right to contraception, no right to marry who you love," alluding, of course, to the Supreme Court's decision in the Dobbs case overturning Roe v. Wade. And then this last one they released, "For a long time, we've reassured ourselves that American democracy is guaranteed, but it is not. We have to defend it, protect it, stand up for it, each and every one of us." So, Brian, I'm kind of wondering, we are 68 days out from the November midterm elections. Why the Thursday before Labor Day holiday weekend? Why now? What's the message here?
Well, Andrew, as somebody who's covered politics for a lot of years, a lot of campaigns traditionally start after Labor Day. Looks like they're trying to get a bit of a jump on it. And as people now start settling in for the 3-day holiday. And this is all geared toward the midterm elections. President Biden, slipping in the polls for months and months and months, has seen a little uptick in the last couple of 3 weeks. And I think they want to take advantage of it as quickly as they can. And so, like all presidents, they pick a very picturesque place to go to make a speech. And you can't get better than Independence Hall.
Yeah, Brian, let's talk about some of the legislative accomplishments the president no doubt will be touting in these remarks in prime time tonight. The Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act on gun reform legislation, the CHIPS Act, billions of dollars in military aid to Ukraine, getting Supreme Court justice through the confirmation process, now Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. That has all happened in the last 4 to 6 months. The announcement just last week about forgiving thousands of dollars of student loan debt that did give the president a little bit of an uptick in the polls. And I think he's now hovering in the low 40s when it comes to approval. Earlier this summer, he was in the low 30s. So this is, a lot that he has accomplished along with fellow House and Senate Democrats. Is it going to be enough to bring voters out in November, though?
Well, if we looked back 6 months, say, Andrew, the president was in big trouble. Now he's got 2 more years in office. But from a midterm perspective, Democrats were in big trouble across the country. With all of these initiatives and passages of laws that you've listed, people may be taking a different view of things. And that's why the White House wants to capitalize on this right away. And that's the whole point of the address tonight. It's under the guise of we have to maintain and protect our democracy, but it's primetime television. It's the president talking about dangers to the nation, and he's going to slip in lots of things that he's done over the last few weeks and months with the help of the Congress of the United States.
You know, Brian, we have been seeing the president, and the White House has said as much, that he's going to be getting out on the campaign trail. Just last Thursday, he was in Maryland, kind of rallying and campaigning for some of the Maryland Democrats. Wes Moore, who's the Democratic gubernatorial nominee there in Maryland, spoke as well. But you also have been seeing some of these other Democratic candidates, especially who are running for Senate seats, distance themselves from the president. I'm thinking of Tim Ryan, not wanting to campaign with him, not wanting him to appear at their events. Why do you think that is? Is he politically toxic, or is that coming around now as the polls get better?
To some extent, and for quite some time, he has been toxic. I think a lot of Democrats said, if I attach myself to the slipping president in terms of polling, and sometimes even from a cognitive standpoint, I think they wanted to move in a different direction. But you raise a really, really interesting point, and that is that if we're seeing an uptick, will they, as time goes on and we move closer to November, begin asking the president to appear on their behalf, which traditionally is something that every congressional candidate desires. But to your point, Ryan and others moved away because I think they did not want to be connected with the president and what appeared to be a president who the American people were not very pleased with.
Okay, I just want to reset here, Brian. If you're just joining us here on Live Now from Fox, you're taking a Live Now look at the podium there with the presidential seal now set up. The red carpet is in place outside of Independence Hall in the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia, the birthplace of American democracy. We've been reading out some excerpts that the White House put out of this speech. It's being termed remarks on the battle for the soul of the nation, which has been a common refrain from then candidate Biden and now President Biden. But, you know, Brian, we were just listening in to House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy speaking in Scranton, talking about some of the president's faults, talking about policies Republicans vehemently disagree with. Of course, we just passed the one-year anniversary of the chaotic U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. He name-checked that in those remarks. Gas prices are coming down precipitously, but not down far enough for a lot of Americans. Inflation still running very hot, very high, the highest in 40 years. So these are the issues Republicans will be running on a little bit later in the fall. We've seen that throughout the primary season this summer. So I know you were kind of listening in to some of House Minority Leader McCarthy's remarks. Do you think that will resonate?
Depending on whether he gains part of the news cycle. Andrew, you know, he's out in front hoping that when the replays of the president's speech later across the nation on broadcast television is given, he is hoping to get his pieces of information in there for the American public as well. And so all of these things are not unexpected, and the fact that they went to Scranton is pretty symbolic as well. Basically going right into the backyard of where the president is going to speak here in a few minutes, and hitting him on all the things you just listed. And you know, the American people are smart. They know that there's been a lot of success here recently legislatively, but all of it has been very costly to the American people. Everything from student loan forgiveness to all of these other pieces of massive legislation, the American people know are very, very expensive undertakings. And the Republicans are going to come out and say, hey, you know, we're bankrupting our grandchildren here. And I think that will resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, you know, Brian, I want to discuss, too, because there was this kind of hiccup, momentary freakout earlier this week by the Washington Press Corps. They saw some FEC filing for Biden's reelection. It turned out that was not the case. It was basically just a formality that the soon-to-be Biden 2024 presidential campaign had to do. But then, of course, the rumors were swirling. That's official. Biden is going to be running for re-election, kind of getting outside and away from a lot of these rumors that have dogged him for the past year about, is he too old? Does he need to, hand pick a successor when it comes to 2024? And then in interviews, he's alluded to, yes, if his opponent is going to be former President Trump, of course he's going to be running. So do you think those rumors are going to persist into the midterm season, that he's too old to run, he needs to step aside and let someone else run in 24?
Oh, absolutely. I think everybody is kind enough not to point out what is evident, not just to Republicans, but to Democrats, and that is President Biden, at his age, does not have the vigor of a younger person. And so, as polite as people can be about it, I think that will be a campaign issue. And I would add that if you're in the Biden camp and you know that the president is not going to run, that is the last thing that you want to signal before the midterms. And so this would be one of the closely guarded secrets in the Biden administration, is what current plans are around his potentially running, or if any plans have been made at all. But it's evident to a lot of people that I speak with in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere on both sides of the aisle that the idea of reelecting Joe Biden is problematic on some levels, most of which is around physical and mental health.
Okay, so when I was alluding to that speech in Rockville, Maryland, just yesterday, the president was joined alongside fellow Maryland Democrats, and he said something that got a lot of heat, especially on the Republican side of the aisle, calling MAGA voters and those who support the MAGA philosophy, the MAGA cause, semi-fascists. And so, these remarks are intended to be a battle for the soul of the nation, to bring the rhetoric down, to restore unity. How does calling half the American electorate semi-fascists do that?
Because I think the calculus, Andrew, is that half that you refer to is maybe 20%. I think the intention of the Biden administration and Democrats is to try to peel off the more radical Republicans, the same as the Democrats view the progressives in their party as 20%ers. So I think the calculus again is, we know we're going to get Democratic support. Now we want to go after Republican support among those that aren't the more right-wing Republicans. And if we can get a bunch of Republicans that are in the middle, as it were, moderates, we'll do very well with those. I think this is very calculated, and it's not a bad political move, to be honest.
Okay, Brian, we're coming up at the quarter of the hour here, almost 8 o'clock in Philadelphia, almost 5 o'clock here on the West Coast. And like we were saying before, the White House did put out some excerpts of these remarks. I want to just put them up on the screen for our viewer yet again and read them out. The first one they put out says, "So tonight I have come here to the place where it all began, to speak plainly to the nation about the threats we face, about the power we have in our own hands to meet those threats, and about the incredible future that lies in front of us if we only choose it." So he's alluding to the significance, the symbolism, the history of being outside Independence Hall there in Philadelphia. Another one they put out says, "MAGA forces are determined to take this country backwards to an America where there is no right to choose, no right to privacy, no right to contraception, no right to marry who you love." Of course, really alluding to the Supreme Court's decision overturning Roe v. Wade earlier in June. And then lastly, for a long time, we've reassured ourselves that American democracy is guaranteed, but it is not. We have to defend it, protect it, stand up for it, each and every one of us. So, Brian, you've heard a lot from President Biden in the last couple of months about the unique nature and threat to, the future of American democracy. Is that threat, is that concern overblown in your eyes? Are there more pressing issues and matters on the minds of American voters than that?
I think some of it's hyperbole, to be honest with you, but it is something that he knows resonates with his base. And he has now come to believe that it resonates with some in the Republican Party as well. And if you think back in history, Lincoln in 1838 was giving a speech where he said the only way that the United States could ever fall is if it happened internally. I'm paraphrasing. And so I think that is sort of the clarion call of President Biden in this speech tonight is that we are doing great damage to ourselves and we need to put the brakes on that. I think a fair number of people in the audience will agree with that, and others will think, well, that's a bit of overblown rhetoric.
Okay, let's talk about some of the issues that are going to be at play in the midterms as well. And in that excerpt the White House put out, just, blatantly alluding to the Dobbs decision, talking about a woman's right to choose, which is under threat nationwide. And we've seen kind of some of the lingering after effects in some of these primary contests. Do you think it has supercharged Democratic support and enthusiasm? Will a lot of voters be heading to the polls this fall thinking about Roe v. Wade?
Not as many as people thought. Looking at the polling, this issue, Roe v. Wade, is not going to be the deciding issue, and that's why I believe you're seeing the administration and the democratically controlled Congress rushing to get a lot of legislation passed as best they can, along with the Supreme Court justice, to say we've made a lot of strides here, and why not vote for us? We've done this. Give us more time in Congress to continue our progress forward, and then in 2 years sort out the presidency as well. At the end of the day, I think it is going to be a series of issues, not one issue, at least if we're to believe the polling we're reading.
Let's go back to what President Biden's role campaigning is going to be in the run-up here. Do you think he needs to get out of the White House more, out of Washington more? We know he's going to Milwaukee and Pittsburgh on Labor Day, meeting with some of the candidates there. But if, Democrats want to retain the majorities in both the House and the Senate, does he need to have more of a central role in that?
It's a complex question, because if his poll numbers aren't great, to our earlier conversation, you probably don't want him coming in and campaigning for you. On the other hand, Air Force One is very symbolic. The beast, as you referred to it earlier, the big car. These things are symbols of this great American democracy, and so you want the president to come in and visit. But here's the kicker, and that is that President Biden has to stay on script, and he has a tendency to go off script, and especially when he's in unfamiliar circumstances. And so as you send him out on the road to various places around the country, it is going to be interesting to see whether he can stay very focused on the candidate, on the geography, on the issues. Many years ago, when I saw Joe Biden in the Senate and spoke with him over the years, he was very much on top of his game. There's a little bit of a different Joe Biden today.
I mean, yes, you're alluding to how prone he is to making gaffes and speaking off the cuff, and when things are not written out for him in a teleprompter, he does get himself in trouble. And then, of course, 2 months is a long time. He could say something in that interim period that we could be talking about that would change the news cycle. But, Brian, frankly, the news cycle right now is focused on former President Trump, on the FBI raid at Mar-a-Lago. Who is that benefiting? Is that benefiting Democrats to have Republicans constantly be bringing up these investigations now into former President Trump with his handling of classified material, or does it, disadvantage them?
This is a gift to the Democrats, because the longer this goes on, the more the focus is on the former president and not on what the current president is saying or people who are running for office. And there's a lot of charges back and forth. But what is dominating the news cycle right now, generally speaking, is the investigation at Mar-a-Lago and the documents that were down there and what they mean in terms of danger to the nation. So the Democrats are doing a very good job of stoking the fire on that, and the Republicans, for their part, are pretty much on defense, trying to say, hey, well, you remember, President Biden isn't doing a very good job, but right now in the news cycle war, they're behind. Republicans, that is.
Right, because to your point, Republicans are now having to only, when they appear on cable or when they talk to reporters answer for what they think about the latest nugget or piece of news in the Trump-related investigations. That takes time away, from hammering Democrats and their policies and their proposals that they disagree with. So I just want to, speaking of these Trump investigations, give the viewer a sense of where we are today with that, because this is in the background. I know we're previewing President Biden's speech, but this is all in the background because we got this hearing in West Palm Beach today with a judge on a request to appoint a special master to look over the seized documents taken from Mar-a-Lago. So there was no official ruling on that from the bench today. The judge there says she's going to do it in a written order. We don't know when that's going to come. We also got an update out of the Fulton County, Georgia investigation being put on by the district attorney there, Fani Willis, looking into 2020 election interference from both Trump and his allies. A judge ruling that Senator Lindsey Graham, the Republican from South Carolina, must comply with the subpoena. They must testify, although the questions will be limited. And then there's more news today on the January 6th committee. Now they're looking to speak with former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. So this is all happening alongside what Democrats are doing there in Philadelphia with President Biden. Let's take this shot live here right outside the doors there to Independence Hall. So we got these three excerpts, Brian. What else do you think the president is going to say? Is he going to be bringing it up? Is this going to be like a State of the Union, rah, 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 going into the midterm season?
I think to some extent, yes. And if his speechwriters are doing him any favor, while he complains about MAGA and other problems and potential radical right-wing efforts in the country, I think he has to find optimism and hope in this speech as well. Even Democrats will not want to sit through a speech that is, however many minutes it will be, just a completely down speech without any enthusiasm, without any promise or hope for the future. So I think it's a rather complex speech to deliver because it's clearly a political speech, but he also has to be enthusiastic about the future of America. He has to back Democratic candidates around the country by saying, vote for my side because look what's behind me, Independence Hall, and we represent the history of this nation. So he has to do all of that in the same speech, and hopefully it hits all the marks from the Democratic point of view. From the Republican point of view, it's very clear that Republicans will be listening very carefully because they will want to pounce on some of these comments that may be coming from the president, which label the Republican Party, label Republicans, and try to utilize that against the president and the Democratic Party.
Okay, if you're just joining us, we're about 5 minutes out from the start of the speech here in Philadelphia by President Biden, delivering these remarks. And Brian, he has not really delivered primetime remarks in some time. I'm thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong here, he did so in the wake of those successive mass shootings earlier in the summer, after Buffalo, after Uvalde, after Tulsa, Oklahoma, and then, of course, that precipitated the passage of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which was the biggest gun reform legislation in 25 years. And then before that, I'm thinking probably a year ago, for the fall of Kabul, the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. He also gave a primetime address then. So he is very early on. He's kind of the halfway mark in his first term, 2 years in. Not many primetime addresses. Let's just talk about what goes into crafting the speech itself. You really have to hit the marks. Walk us through some of that.
Sure. Well, he has an entire speechwriting staff who put together a first cut or a couple of first drafts. Then that speech goes out for review by any number of people in the West Wing, in various departments of the government. If certain departments are going to be mentioned in the speech, that department, say Homeland Security or anything else, would have to review that speech. Then it gets edited, sent back out. It's this iterative process that takes a long time, and it sometimes ends up, Andrew, as a very disjointed speech, kind of a mishmash, where everybody's got their one sentence in there. The best speeches are ones where they are highly controlled. The message is very clear, and everything toes to the message that you're trying to give. Now, if tonight, for example, the message is MAGA's bad, we have to be on guard against right-wing radicals who are trying to take down the government. That's a sort of a singular point. But if the president is going to try to introduce numerous topics, that is complex, and it requires some really good speech writing. And so we'll see what kind of speech it is tonight.
You know, I think a cornerstone of the speech is going to be about threats of political violence as well, Brian. Just, you know, coming and emanating from really both sides of the political aisle. We got the news today that a former NYPD police officer, his name Thomas Webster, was sentenced to 10 years in prison in connection with the January 6th Capitol riot. That is the longest sentence handed down in the hundreds of convictions that have been gotten since January 6th. And so we also have been reporting as well a lot of the threats against federal law enforcement in the wake of the raid there at Mar-a-Lago in South Florida. And so this is top of mind for so many, including President Biden. I think he's going to name check this as well tonight.
I would think so. You know, there's been roughly just under 1,000 indictments, lots of convictions, lots of mea culpas. It is a story that can be utilized by the president to very clearly lay out the threat against the United States from within, going back to my reference to Abraham Lincoln. And that has traction, Andrew, and that's the speech he's trying to give tonight, is this warning. But again, the complexity of the speech is to try to stitch together these 3 or 4 or 5 themes that he's going to try to put together, which should give the viewer, voter, an idea of who to vote for. And in the case of the president and Democrats, it's for Democratic candidates around the country.
Yeah, 2 things that I'll be looking out for. We're about 2 minutes away from the speech beginning, but I will be interested to see if he does actually, you know, name former President Trump in remarks like this. So many times he refers to him as my predecessor or the other guy or something like that. I'll also be wondering, you know, who is this speech for? I know we've been talking about that a lot, and we're talking about independents. Will any independents maybe decide I'm going to go Democratic in the fall after watching this speech? Maybe, maybe not. Brian, final thoughts.
Independents are very important. I think he's talking with his base tonight. I think he's trying to peel off Republicans. I think he's targeting independents for sure. And again, complex speech. We'll see how it goes and really what the response is around the nation.
All right, Brian Sobel, we appreciate your time, your insight, and your expertise into all things politics there. President Biden, no doubt, going to be opening the doors in the front there in Independence Hall in Philadelphia, stepping up to the podium very soon. Brian, thanks.
You're very welcome, Andrew.